Hi everyone and welcome to Johnny How To. Today we're going to go through the fun process of colorizing an old photo, or you can take a photo that you've taken or that you find that's a color photo, turn it into black and white, and then give it this vintage feel. So right now I already have a black and white photo to start with, but what we're going to basically try and mimic today is the old Technicolor process where they had all kinds of these black and white movies and they wanted to turn them into color movies, and so they had a process where they basically by hand made these into color images, and has this really nice vintage look to it. You can tell it's not naturally shot in color, but it has a really cool look to it. So that's kind of what we're going to try and mimic. So this image that I have here right now is of Lou Gehrig, an old time baseball player that I happen to be a fan of. And if you're wanting to follow along and use this same image, if you just open up Google, put Lou Gehrig dugout bats and click on images, you should find that in a few different spots. You can go ahead and use that photo to follow along. So to get started, all I've done is I renamed this layer by double clicking on it and giving it a name. And I did make sure that afterwards I locked it because I don't actually want to move this. And just to be clear, the way that I'm going to show you here is not the only way you can do this. There's a lot of different ways you can go about colorizing a photo. This just happens to be one of them. When I was first learning, I did it a completely different way. Now I happen to do it a different way now. So feel free to experiment and find your own way of doing it. It might vary from photo to photo, but this is just one way of being able to do it. So what I'm going to use here, what I'm going to do here rather, is I'm going to use the quick selection tool right here to try and get me a selection with less effort. And I'm going to go and start off with this face here. So I'm going to go ahead and use the bracket keys to make my selection bigger, smaller with the quick selection tool. And I'm just on the Gehrig photo layer, at least that's what I've named it. I'm just going to go ahead and click, and you can see I've grabbed part of it for it. I click again. I click a couple more times around the different areas, and you can see I've got most of his head already selected. I'll go and do Control or Command plus to zoom in. I'll hold on the space bar and left click and drag to pan around. I'm just going to go ahead and grab roughly the remainder of his face. Now notice I've grabbed more than I wanted. I have the underside of the bill of his hat, which obviously isn't part of his skin tones, but I can always subtract areas that I don't want later on. I think it's easier if I go and start off with this. So first thing I'm going to do is refine the selection, soften a little bit. So I'm going to choose Select and Mask, and I happen to be on the overlay view right now. Remember, on any of these views, whether it's the black and white or whatever other ones you might be on, you can always adjust how strongly it's going to show up by using this overlay slider right here. So in this case, it might actually help me a little bit more to see how harsh this is. And it's not too bad, to be honest. It selected it pretty well. But you can see that there's a little bit of stair-stepping, meaning it's a little bit jagged along some of the edges. And so if I use this smooth parameter here just a little bit, you can see that almost immediately goes away just with a very small value of like 3 or something like that. So that's going to help out a little bit. I don't think I need to adjust it too much more here. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And now I have a selection that I can go ahead and start as the basis of what I'm going to use for coloring in his face skin tone. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this little half circle here, or strike through circle, and I'm going to use my adjustment layers. Now, unfortunately, they're actually going off screen, so you can't see them. In fact, I'm going to resize my window so you can see these a little bit. So if I go and click on this, you can see that I have all these different options. And what these are, this button adds an adjustment layer of some sort. So I'll explain what an adjustment layer is in just a moment, but I'm going to go ahead and choose, I'll go and do just solid color for now. So I'll select that. And basically what this is going to do, and I'll explain adjustment layers a little bit more in a second, is it's going to fill this area with a particular color. Now, I can change this after the fact, but I'll go and start with kind of just what I might think might work as a skin tone. I might go back and change this quite a bit afterwards. But basically, let me go and turn this off for a second and talk about what an adjustment layer does a little bit more. So I'm going to go ahead and add a different adjustment layer. I'm going to click on this little half circle here, and I'm going to click on brightness contrast. And you can see here in my layer palette, I have this brightness contrast that's above all my other layers. This layer that I have turned off, and then my Gehrig photo. So no matter how many layers I have in my composition, if I go ahead and adjust this brightness, it's going to affect all the layers below it. So even though I'm not adjusting the brightness and contrast directly on this Gehrig photo, because this layer is above it, it's going to affect all the layers below it. And I'll have a separate video just on adjustment layers. But for now, I just want you to know what I'm doing was create an adjustment layer. And basically the adjustment layer I created was an adjustment layer that created a solid color. Now the reason the solid color only appears where his face is because basically when I did that select and mask, or I used the quick selection tool and then refine it with the select and mask, is it created a mask for me saying, you know what, this solid color is only allowed to appear in this area. Now, if I was to go ahead and by the way, I'm alt left clicking to view my mask, alt left click again to go back, click the eye icon to go on and off. But if I want to cancel out this image mask, I can hold down shift and left click on it. And now you can see this has filled the entire area of the image with this color, but with this layer mask, it's just limiting the fill just to his face right now. So that's all that that's doing. So I'm gonna go and zoom in again on his face. So Control plus, and I'll hold down spacebar, left click and drag the pan up. And typically, so from the drop-down menu here, these are my different operations as far as how I can layer one specific layer, in this case adjustment layer, over another. So basically for colorizing these old photos, overlay tends to work well. Either that or just color tends to work good as well. I'm going to go ahead, so color's down here. And so you can see they're giving me fairly similar results. I'm going to go ahead and go with overlay for now, but try and see which one happens to work better for you. This is a little bit more subtle for me right now, so I kind of like that. The cool thing is, since we've not colored directly on the photo, is we can change this at any given point just by double clicking on this layer, and we can go and drag around and change his skin tones to whatever we want after the fact. So I mean, if we want a Hulk Lou Gehrig, we can do that if we want, and we can change it at any given point in time. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and probably give him a little bit more subtle skin tones. I'll go ahead and start off with something like that. And I'm going to go ahead and exclude the areas that I don't want from this. So remember, I have the underside of the bill of his hat that I don't want to be part of this selection, so I want to deselect that. And remember, I'm using a mask to determine where this shows up and where it doesn't. Where it's white, it's going to show up. Where it's black, it's not. And so if I have this mask selected and I paint with my brush tool right here with black, I'll go and turn up my opacity of the black that I'm going to paint with. I'll use my bracket keys to adjust my brush bigger, smaller. I can go ahead and paint out effectively where this is allowed to show up. And I'm using a soft brush. I just right clicked right now and the hardness is down to 0. So I can define a nice gradual fall off to where the skin tones leave off and then the black and white of the bill of his hat continue, but I'm going to color his hat in the next step. Another part I probably don't want to be actual colorized by his skin tones are probably going to be his sideburns. So I'll go ahead and make the brush size smaller, still painted with black. I'll go ahead and exclude this from my mask. I'll use bracket keys to make it smaller again. Do the same thing with the other side. Instead of using a soft brush, it's going to be a little bit more easier to get away with this. Okay, there we go. And I'll go ahead and do his eyes, since I'm pretty sure he probably doesn't have skin brown eyes, or skin tone eyes, at least what I'm using in this case. And maybe I'll go ahead and do his eyebrows as well. Okay, so basically all I've done is painting with black. I've adjusted my image mask to look like that now. So I've just taken out certain areas that I don't want that colorized look to appear on quite yet, because I'm going to do those separately. You can see this is softer up here, so I have a nice transition. So I'll left click to go back. And I'm just basically going to repeat this process for the other areas as well. So I'll go ahead and do one other area. I'm going to go ahead and do the hat, and then I'll leave the rest for another video just so you can see it finished. But I'm going to go ahead and use the, well, you know what? Let's just go ahead and do this one manually, just so you can do this manually as well. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer, and I'll go ahead and just paint with the brush a bluish color. And I can't remember exactly what exact color of blue the Yankees hats are, but I'll go ahead and just go with that. I'm just going to paint on this layer. Before I even start, I'll say this is hat color. And this color fill that I did earlier, I'll call this skin tones. And with this hat color, I'm doing this different. I'm not using the quick selection tool, even though I could. I'm just going to paint with blue with the brush on here. I'll go ahead and paint it with 100% opacity. And I'm going to go and set it to overlay so I can see what it's going to look like as I'm painting. So now I can see, all right, it's a little bit strong, but I can always adjust the opacity afterwards. And I am painting with the soft brush, so it's going to be a little bit going outside the lines. But basically, there's the hat that's kind of been painted in. And if I go ahead and select this layer and down the opacity, that feeds in there not all too shabbily. So you don't have to use the quick selection tool that I was using earlier. You just might be able to get a nice selection with less effort. And the big benefit of using the quick selection tool and then using this color fill or the solid color is that I can change this color anywhere after the fact. Whereas with this manual coloring I've done up here, if I turn off these other layers, you can see I've just painted with the color. And if I wanted to paint it, I can't just double click and change the color. I actually have to go back and either color it over again, or I have to change the color as far as just painting with the brush again. So this is a little bit more flexible of an option, using the quick selection and making a mask out of it. But you can do it either way. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the video here because I've kind of gotten at least the basics across, and then I'll finish this up in the next video and go through to completion. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video on Johnny How To.